The HOA sent me a bill for $47,000 in delinquent landscaping fees. For flowers they planted on my grandfather's land while I was burying him. I drive back to Texas expecting 40 acres of empty cattle pasture. Instead, there's a sign reading, Meadowbrook Estates, a gated community. The metallic clang of the security gate closing behind some soccer mom's SUV makes my blood boil. 145 houses, a clubhouse, tennis courts built over Grandpa's old barn foundation. The HOA president click-clacks over in stilettos, waving papers that smell like expensive lawyer ink. "Mr. Thornfield, you owe us money for community improvements on your property." The taste of rage fills my mouth. This woman just tried to charge me for stealing my own land. Big mistake, Cordelia. You just picked a fight with someone who spent 30 years catching people exactly like you. If you've ever dealt with an HOA from hell, smash that like button. I want to know I'm not alone in this madness. Where are you watching from? Drop your location below and tell me if this kind of corruption has hit your town too. My name is Rex Thornfield, and 3 months ago I was living quiet retirement in Colorado, thinking my biggest problem was whether to plant tomatoes or peppers. Then my grandfather Ezra died at 94, stubborn as a mule right to the end. Ezra Thornfield had owned 40 acres of prime Texas real estate since 1967, sitting between growing Cedar Park suburbs and state conservation land. Developers circled like vultures for 30 years, offering millions to sell. His answer was always the same. Boy, they can have this land when they pry the deed from my cold, dead hands. Apparently, they didn't wait that long. I inherited the property along with Ezra's cattle operation and his legendary hatred of anyone wearing suits to work. The plan was simple. Sell the cattle, build a modest cabin, spend my golden years fishing the creek where I'd caught my first bass at age 7. 30 years as a professional land surveyor taught me to read property law like sheet music. I knew every boundary marker, every easement, every inch of that land from memory. What I didn't know was that while I was arranging Ezra's funeral, someone had been very busy back in Texas. The first trouble came in my mailbox. That $47,000 bill. The itemization made my head spin. Landscaping fees, $23,000. Pool maintenance, $12,000. Tennis court resurfacing, $8,000. Clubhouse utilities, $4,000. All for amenities I'd never seen, on property I'd never agreed to develop. The bill claimed I owned Lot 47, Meadowbrook Estates, and owed 18 months of delinquent HOA dues dating back to when Ezra was still alive. At the bottom in bold red letters, Lien will be placed on property if not paid within 30 days. Here's a critical legal fact. Property liens can be filed against land for unpaid debts, but they must be legitimate debts against the actual property owner. Filing false liens is federal fraud. The penalties start at 5 years in prison. Before I could process what Meadowbrook Estates meant, my phone rang. "Mr. Thornfield, this is Cordelia Blackstone, president of Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I'm calling about your delinquent account." Her voice was pure sugar with a razor blade hidden inside, the kind that makes you check your wallet while she's talking. "Lady, I think you've got the wrong number." "Oh, but you do own property in our community, sweetie. Lot 47 to be precise. Your grandfather agreed to subdivision before he passed." I hung up and drove straight to Texas. Cordelia Blackstone looked like she stepped out of a luxury real estate magazine. Perfectly styled blonde hair that doesn't move in hurricane winds, makeup applied with architectural precision, smile that makes predators jealous. She drives a white Mercedes SUV with custom HOA license plates and treats every conversation like a hostile corporate takeover. Cordelia doesn't just run the HOA, she is the HOA. City council member, owns Blackstone Realty, has manicured fingers in every development deal within 50 miles. The woman collects power positions like some people collect stamps. Our first meeting went exactly as expected. I'm standing where Grandpa's front pasture used to be, looking at a community pool built over Thunder, the bull's favorite grazing spot, when this white Mercedes screeches up the pristine blacktop. The crunch of her stilettos on gravel sounds like gunshots. Expensive leather and pricier perfume assault my nostrils before she exits the car. "Excuse me, sir? You're trespassing on private community property." I hold up Ezra's deed, signed and notarized in 1967. The paper feels rough and yellowed between my fingers. Real history, unlike whatever corporate nonsense she's peddling. "Actually, ma'am, I think you might be trespassing." She doesn't even look at the document, waves it away like a gnat. "That's very old paperwork, sweetie. Your grandfather was very cooperative during our planning process." Then she produces a folder thick with official documents, HOA covenants, community agreements, subdivision plats, all showing Ezra's signature agreeing to turn his cattle ranch into suburban paradise. The condescension in her voice could power a small city. But here's what made my blood turn to ice. I recognized my grandfather's signature on those documents, and it was perfect. Too perfect. Ezra's arthritis had made his handwriting shaky for 5 years before he died. These signatures looked like they were written by a 20-year-old. Tell you what, she continues, pulling out her phone, why don't I call security to help you find someplace more appropriate for your little camping situation? Old Thunder would have charged this woman and sent her running for the county line. I was starting to think the bull had the right approach to dealing with trespassers. That's when I realized I wasn't facing simple HOA overreach. I was looking at someone who'd forged legal documents, stolen 40 acres, built 145 houses on it, and was now trying to gaslight the actual owner into paying for the privilege. Cordelia Blackstone had no idea she'd just declared war on the wrong man. Within 24 hours of my conversation with Cordelia, the legal blitz began. This woman had turned bureaucratic harassment into a military operation. First came the official lien filing with Travis County. $500 in filing fees, meaning Cordelia was serious enough about this charade to put real money behind it. The lien claimed I owed $47,000 plus penalties, interest, and attorney fees, now totaling $53,847. Now, I'd seen property liens before during my surveying career. They're supposed to secure legitimate debts against actual property owners. Filing false liens, that's federal fraud with penalties starting at 5 years in prison. Cordelia was playing with serious fire, but she obviously didn't know it yet. Then her downtown Austin law firm sent certified mail demanding I provide legitimate proof of ownership for land my family had owned since Johnson was president. The thick envelope reeked of expensive lawyer cologne and legal threats. But here's where it got interesting. I drove to the county clerk's office to pull the original property records, and they were missing, not misfiled, gone. The clerk, a nervous woman who kept checking over her shoulder, whispered that someone from city planning had requested them for digitization 6 months ago. 6 months ago, right when Cordelia would have needed them to disappear. The conspiracy became crystal clear when I started connecting dots. The subdivision plat showing my land carved into 147 residential lots, filed exactly 2 days after Ezra's death. The city planning approval, signed by Director James Blackstone, Cordelia's brother-in-law. The bank that approved construction loans. First National of Cedar Park, where the president plays golf every Thursday with 3 HOA board members. This wasn't just theft, it was organized crime with business cards. My counterpunch started with a call to the Texas State Board of Professional Surveyors. When licensed surveyors discover fraudulent boundary work, we're required to report it. Time to use that 30-year reputation. Next, I hired Patricia Indigo, the best forensic document examiner in the Southwest. Her laboratory smelled like chemical fixatives and precision, the scent of truth being uncovered under microscopes. Within 4 hours, she'd proven what I suspected. Ezra's signatures were masterful forgeries. Whoever did this is very good, Dr. Indigo said, adjusting her equipment. But they made one critical mistake. Your grandfather switched from blue to black ink in 2019 after his stroke. These signatures from 2022 are all in blue ink. Federal fraud evidence, documented and certified. But Cordelia wasn't finished. The next morning, I woke to 3 families from Meadowbrook Estates standing outside my RV, holding a petition with 47 signatures demanding I pay my fair share. Look, we don't want trouble, said Janet Morrison, a tired woman holding a toddler. But our kids play in that park you're blocking access to. Can't you work something out with the HOA? Coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I realized Cordelia's genius. She'd turned innocent families into unwitting enforcers, convinced them I was some deadbeat neighbor stiffing the community. Ma'am, what did Mrs. Blackstone tell you about this situation? That you inherited a lot in our neighborhood but refused to pay HOA dues. She said you're using old paperwork to avoid responsibilities. Janet Morrison wasn't evil. She was a working mom protecting her kids' playground, but she had no idea she was living on stolen land, her mortgage secured by property that legally didn't exist. My phone buzzed. Text from unknown number. Nice people you're harassing. Shame if something happened to their property values because of your selfishness. Cordelia was threatening the very families she'd manipulated into confronting me. That afternoon, the Cedar Park Gazette ran a front-page story. Deadbeat neighbor refuses to pay fair share. The article, clearly fed by Cordelia's machine, painted me as a selfish outsider disrupting peaceful community. The newsprint felt grimy between my fingers as I read lie after lie. Here's what Cordelia didn't know. While she played media games, I'd contacted the FBI field office in Austin. I remembered from old cases that bank fraud involving forged documents falls under federal jurisdiction. When construction loans exceed $1 million based on fraudulent collateral, that gets their attention fast. Special Agent Maria Santos listened with the focused intensity of someone who'd seen this corruption before. Evidence bags crinkled as I handed over Dr. Indigo's forensic report, copies of forged documents, and conspiracy timeline. "Mr. Thornfield," she said, "how would you feel about wearing a wire?" The sound of that question echoing in the federal building told me everything I needed to know. Cordelia thought she was playing checkers, but this had just become federal chess. 3 weeks into this nightmare, I realized Cordelia's fundamental miscalculation. She'd assumed a quiet guy in work boots couldn't possibly understand the legal system well enough to fight back. She thought she could steamroll me with lawyers, liens, and social pressure. Wrong assumption, dead wrong. The woman had picked a fight with someone who'd spent 3 decades documenting property fraud for prosecutors. I knew exactly how these schemes worked because I'd helped convict people just like her. Now it was time to return the favor. The social warfare campaign began exactly 1 week after my FBI meeting. Cordelia had obviously decided legal pressure wasn't working fast enough, so she escalated to full psychological warfare. First came the emergency HOA meeting about my antisocial behavior. The flyer, printed on expensive cardstock that felt corporate and threatening, listed my supposed crimes: operating loud generator after 10 p.m., improper waste disposal, threatening behavior toward residents, and my personal favorite, failure to maintain community standards. I'd been documenting everything, so I knew these complaints were pure fiction. My generator ran 2 hours daily during afternoon heat. My waste disposal meant driving to county dump twice weekly. The only threatening behavior was existing on my own land. But 43 families showed up to that meeting. Through binoculars, I watched them file into the clubhouse built over Grandpa's vegetable garden. Evening barbecue smoke drifted across what used to be open pasture, now filled with people genuinely believing I was their problem. The HOA voted unanimously to fine me $500 per day for ongoing covenant violations. From my surveying days, I knew this was legally meaningless. HOAs only have authority over people who actually sign their agreements, not random neighbors who happen to own adjacent land. But Cordelia was betting these families didn't understand that distinction. She was essentially fining me for breathing while unauthorized. The next escalation came as security patrols. 3 times daily, a white pickup with Meadowbrook security magnets cruised past my RV, stopping to photograph and write clipboard notes. The crunch of gravel under their tires became my daily soundtrack. Here's where Cordelia made another critical mistake. I photographed the guards and ran their plates. Meadowbrook Security wasn't a licensed company, just Cordelia's nephews, Billy and Jake Blackstone, driving Billy's personal truck with fake magnetic signs. Using unlicensed security to harass someone? That's impersonating law enforcement, which Texas takes very seriously. My counterpunch started with a formal complaint to the Department of Public Safety about unlicensed security operations. Then I filed stalking charges against Billy and Jake with county sheriff. The paperwork felt satisfying as I documented weeks of systematic harassment. But the real breakthrough came when I hired private investigator Carmen Valdez. Carmen had spent 15 years with Austin PD before going private, and she knew how to unearth buried secrets. "Rex," she said, spreading files across her desk like a poker dealer revealing a royal flush. "This woman has done this exact scheme 3 times before." The pattern was identical. Target elderly property owners during family crises, forge documents while they're distracted, use city connections for fast-track approvals, then gaslight anyone who objects. Previous victims had been too poor, old, or isolated to fight back effectively. One case made my blood run cold. Margaret Indigo, 84-year-old widow whose husband died of COVID in 2021. While Margaret was hospitalized herself, Cordelia somehow got her to sign documents transferring her 5-acre lot to a development trust. Margaret lost her home and died 6 months later in a nursing facility, never understanding what happened to her family's land. The taste of injustice was metallic and bitter. This wasn't about my property anymore. This was about stopping a serial predator. Carmen's investigation revealed something else shocking. Cordelia's operation was hemorrhaging money. Construction loans for Meadowbrook Estates totaled $47 million, but sales had stalled. She needed those HOA fees desperately to service debt payments, or the whole scheme would collapse. That's why she'd been so aggressive billing me. She was embezzling from homeowners to pay loans secured by stolen land. But here's the twist that changed everything. Carmen discovered Cordelia had been intercepting my mail. Federal crime number 4, and the dumbest one yet. She's got a postal worker on payroll, Carmen explained, showing me surveillance photos. Your legal documents have been disappearing before you even knew they existed. That explained why I'd missed several court notices that should have tipped me off to the scope of this fraud months earlier. Cordelia had been manipulating the legal timeline to keep me in the dark while she consolidated her position. Meanwhile, the smear campaign intensified. Anonymous letters appeared in neighbors' mailboxes claiming I was a dangerous vagrant with criminal history. Someone created fake online reviews for my old surveying business, claiming I'd been investigated for fraud. The irony was thick enough to choke on. But the harassment backfired when investigative journalist Maxine Rodriguez from the Austin Chronicle contacted me. She'd been tracking HOA abuse statewide and noticed the pattern in Cordelia's developments. "Mr. Thornfield," Maxine said over coffee, her recorder between us, "I think you're sitting on the biggest municipal corruption story this county has seen in decades." That evening, Janet Morrison approached my RV, looking embarrassed. The same woman who'd confronted me with that petition 3 weeks earlier. "Mr. Thornfield, I owe you an apology. Some of us have been asking questions and, well, the answers aren't adding up." The sound of doubt creeping into voices that had been certain of my guilt. That was Cordelia's empire starting to crack. 3 families had started questioning the fake security guards. 2 more had asked uncomfortable questions about property ownership. Word was spreading that maybe, just maybe, the quiet guy in work boots wasn't the villain in this story. Cordelia's fundamental error was assuming escalating pressure would make me fold. Instead, every harassment tactic just gave me more evidence and attracted more allies. The woman was digging her own grave, one fake security patrol at a time. The government corruption phase began when Cordelia realized her social pressure campaign was backfiring. Time to unleash her network of bought and paid-for city officials. First came the emergency city council session on a Tuesday night, hastily called with 48 hours' notice. The agenda had one item, Ordinance 2024-47, prohibition of recreational vehicles in residential zones. The smell of bureaucratic corruption hung in the air like cheap cologne as I watched from the gallery. The ordinance was clearly written by lawyers, Cordelia's lawyers specifically. It banned RVs, travel trailers, and temporary structures from any property zoned residential within city limits. The kicker? Retroactive to January 1st, making me instantly guilty the moment they passed it. "This ordinance protects property values and community standards," Councilman David Morse announced, reading prepared remarks. The irony of protecting property values by stealing someone's actual property wasn't lost on me. From my surveying career, I remembered this kind of targeted legislation was constitutionally problematic. Laws aren't supposed to target specific individuals. That's called a bill of attainder, and it's explicitly forbidden by the Constitution. But Cordelia was betting I wouldn't know constitutional law well enough to challenge it. Wrong bet. The vote was 4-1, with only Councilwoman Sarah Martinez dissenting. "This feels rushed and potentially discriminatory," she said. The taste of her courage was refreshing in a room full of cowards. 24 hours later, Building Inspector Frank Kellerman arrived with condemnation papers. The man reeked of nervous sweat and kept avoiding eye contact, classic signs of someone doing something they know is wrong. "Mr. Thornfield, your structure has been deemed uninhabitable and in violation of city codes." I looked at my pristine 2019 RV, probably cleaner than half the apartments in Austin. "On what grounds?" "Improper septic connections, inadequate electrical systems, and, he consulted his clipboard nervously. "Non-compliance with residential building standards." The man was reading from a script and doing it badly. Here's where the conspiracy got brazen. Carmen's investigation revealed Frank Kellerman received a $5,000 consulting fee from Blackstone Realty 2 weeks earlier. Payment for services rendered, apparently. My counterpunch started with a federal civil rights lawsuit filed by Harrison Steele, 74-year-old legal bulldog who'd come out of retirement specifically for this case. Harrison had prosecuted municipal corruption when Nixon was president, and he smelled blood in the water. "Rex," Harrison said, his office filled with musty law books and righteous anger, "they violated so many constitutional principles, I'll need a bigger briefcase." The lawsuit named Cordelia, the city, and 6 officials for conspiracy to violate civil rights under federal law. When government officials work with private parties to deprive citizens of constitutional rights, that triggers Section 1983 liability, and the damages can be absolutely devastating. But Cordelia wasn't finished with her government assault. Next came the county health department wellness check led by Supervisor Patricia Williams, married to HOA board member Robert Williams. The conflict of interest was so blatant it would have been funny if it wasn't trying to destroy my life. The inspection team arrived in full hazmat gear, like my RV was a biological weapons lab. The sound of their equipment beeping and whirring echoed across the pasture as they discovered non-existent violations, contaminated water supply, improper waste disposal, potential disease vectors. "Mr. Thornfield," Supervisor Williams announced, dramatically pulling off her mask. "This living situation presents a clear and present danger to public health. If Grandpa could see this circus, he'd have laughed until his dentures fell out." The woman was declaring a spotless RV a biohazard while standing next to a community pool built without proper permits. The legal masterstroke that revealed corruption depth. Judge Robert Sterling, Cordelia's husband's golf partner, granted a restraining order prohibiting me from harassing community residents by maintaining unauthorized presence on residential property. A judge issued a restraining order preventing me from existing on my own land. The mini twist that broke this phase wide open came when city employee Jennifer Walsh grew a conscience. She worked in planning and had watched the circus with growing disgust, finally leaking emails showing the entire ordinance was written by Morrison, Klein, and Associates, Cordelia's law firm, and rubber-stamped by city council. The electronic trail showed coordination between Cordelia, city officials, and the health department going back 6 months. Harrison Steele's eyes lit up seeing those emails. "Rex, they just handed us a federal conspiracy case on a silver platter." The leaked documents revealed something more damning. This wasn't Cordelia's first rodeo using bought officials to steal property. Same pattern used against Margaret Indigo and 2 other elderly victims. Same ordinances, same inspectors, same judges. It was a criminal enterprise masquerading as municipal government. State Representative Lisa Rodriguez caught wind and launched formal legislative investigation. The smell of political careers ending filled the State House as she announced hearings on municipal corruption and property rights violations. But here's what really made Cordelia panic. The FBI had been recording everything. Every phone call between city officials and Blackstone Realty. Every email coordination. Every cash payment disguised as consulting fees. Agent Santos visited again, this time with a smile that could power the entire electrical grid. "Mr. Thornfield, we're ready for the next phase." The sound of federal handcuffs being tested echoed in my mind as I realized Cordelia's corruption network was about to become evidence in a RICO prosecution. 3 weeks earlier, she'd controlled city council, building department, health department, and courts. Now she was about to discover federal law enforcement doesn't care how many local officials you've purchased. Some lessons are expensive. Cordelia was getting a master class in the difference between local corruption and federal jurisdiction. The phone call that changed everything came at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Agent Santos, her voice crackling with barely contained excitement. "Rex, you need to get down to the federal building, now. We found something that's going to blow this case wide open." What they'd found was a forensic accountant's wet dream, a complete financial map of Cordelia's criminal enterprise, traced through 6 banks, 14 shell companies, and 3 states. The smell of fresh coffee and excitement filled the FBI conference room as Agent Santos spread out charts that looked like a serial killer's conspiracy board. "Your 40 acres was just the beginning," she said, pointing to a property map covered in red pins. "We're looking at systematic theft of over 300 acres across 5 developments." The numbers made my head spin. Cordelia's operation had generated $127 million in fraudulent real estate transactions over 4 years. She'd stolen land from 11 different families, most elderly or dealing with crises, then used forged documents to secure construction loans from banks who thought they were financing legitimate developments. Here's the kicker that made my surveyor's brain reel. Every single house in Meadowbrook Estates was built on stolen land. Not just mine, stolen from different property owners whose land had been systematically acquired through forgery, fraud, and municipal corruption. The entire subdivision was a criminal enterprise masquerading as a residential community. "The homeowners living there," I asked, "do they have any idea?" None. Their title insurance policies are based on fraudulent documents. Their mortgages are secured by property the banks don't actually have legal right to foreclose on. We're looking at the largest residential title fraud case in Texas history. The personal betrayal hit like a physical blow when they showed me surveillance footage. Cordelia had visited my grandfather 6 times during his final illness, each time bringing documents for him to sign. The grainy nursing home security camera showed her patience, her kindness, her gentle insistence. These were just estate planning papers. Ezra, weakened by chemo and barely coherent, had refused to sign anything each time. His handwritten notes found in his bedside table after he died were heartbreaking. "That woman wants my land. Not happening. Rex will know what to do." The paper felt fragile between my fingers, like touching his final act of defiance. When Cordelia realized she couldn't manipulate a dying man, she switched to Plan B, forge everything and hope the family was too grief-stricken to notice until too late. The insurance fraud layer added another $47 million. Every fraudulent home sale included title insurance based on stolen property. When homeowners filed legitimate claims, insurance companies paid out, completely unaware their policies were worthless paper based on forged documents. "She's essentially running a Ponzi scheme," the FBI's financial crime specialist explained, using insurance payouts from earlier fraudulent sales to finance new land thefts. But Ponzi schemes always collapse. That collapse was happening now. Construction loans for 3 new developments had stalled because banks were finally asking uncomfortable questions about property ownership. Cordelia needed those HOA fees from Meadowbrook desperately, not for community improvements, but to service $73 million in outstanding construction debt. Without my 40 acres worth of HOA dues, her entire financial house of cards was crumbling. But the revelation that changed my strategy completely: I didn't want to destroy 145 innocent families to get justice. These people had bought homes in good faith, gotten legitimate mortgages, raised children in what they thought was their own backyard. They were victims, not villains. If Grandpa could see this mess, he'd probably say, "Rex, sometimes the best way to catch a thief is to let them keep stealing until they steal from someone who can fight back." The old man always did have a talent for turning problems into opportunities. Agent Santos showed me the legal trap we were setting: force Cordelia and conspirators to purchase all stolen land at fair market value, plus massive penalties, plus full restitution to victims. Money would help affected families while criminals faced decades in federal prison. "We're not just seeking justice for you, Rex. We're building a case that protects every family in that subdivision and prevents this from happening to anyone else." The power had completely shifted. 3 months ago, I was a grieving grandson who'd inherited farmland. Now, I was the key witness in a federal racketeering case that would reshape how property fraud is prosecuted nationwide. The taste of impending justice was metallic and sharp, like the moment before lightning strikes. Cordelia still thought she was fighting a simple property dispute with a stubborn old man. She had no idea she was about to face the full weight of federal justice, backed by 847 pages of evidence and testimony from a dozen co-conspirators already cutting deals to avoid life sentences. The war room assembled in Harrison Steele's downtown Austin law office looked like something out of a legal thriller. Evidence boxes stacked floor to ceiling, 3 whiteboards covered in financial flow charts, and enough coffee to fuel a small army of attorneys working 18-hour days. The smell of old leather law books mixed with fresh printer ink and takeout Chinese food as we mapped out our assault on Cordelia's empire. Harrison had emerged from retirement like a legal Rambo, bringing 40 years of prosecutorial experience and a burning desire to nail municipal corruption one last time. "Gentlemen," Harrison announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd sent corrupt politicians to federal prison, "we're not just fighting a property dispute, we're dismantling a criminal enterprise that's operated under everyone's nose for 4 years. The legal dream team was impressive. Federal prosecutor Amanda Indigo would handle criminal RICO charges. Real estate expert Dr. James Morrison would calculate damages approaching $180 million. Forensic accountant Sarah Williams would trace every penny through Cordelia's shell company maze. Each brought expertise that made Cordelia's high-priced attorneys look like mall lawyers. Our strategy had 4 simultaneous prongs: criminal referral for federal charges, civil RICO lawsuit for financial damages, constitutional violations against corrupt officials, and coordination with state insurance commissioner on fraudulent policies. I remembered from old surveying cases that RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, was designed exactly for situations like this. When multiple people conspire to commit fraud using mail or wire communications, each participant faces up to 20 years federal prison plus financial penalties exceeding their net worth. Cordelia's crew had been mailing fraudulent documents for 4 years, creating a prosecutor's dream. The knowledge nugget that excited our team most was title insurance subrogation. When fraudulent real estate sales are discovered, insurance companies can sue everyone involved to recover losses. With $47 million in fraudulent payouts, every conspirator faced liability that would bankrupt them permanently. Amanda Indigo spread insurance claim documents across the conference table like cards in a poker game. Rex, when insurance companies realize they've been defrauded, they become very motivated plaintiffs. They have unlimited resources and excellent attorneys. The community protection plan was equally crucial. We established legal defense funds for innocent homeowners, obtained restraining orders preventing more fraudulent sales, and negotiated with banks to freeze foreclosures until ownership was properly established. Media strategy, coordinated by Maxine Rodriguez, would expose corruption while protecting the community. The rapid-fire clicking of her keyboard echoed through the office as she crafted stories separating innocent residents from corrupt officials. Allies mobilized statewide. The Surveyor Association provided expert witnesses on boundary fraud. A competing developer offered temporary housing for displaced families. Texas Attorney General assigned Special Prosecutor Linda Santos to coordinate state charges with federal prosecution. The financial trap was elegant. Every day Cordelia continued collecting HOA fees, increased fraud penalties exponentially. Each harassment incident created obstruction evidence. Every threatening call was recorded for federal prosecutors. From old cases, I knew conspiracy charges were devastating because when people work together to commit fraud, each person faces charges for all crimes by the group, regardless of personal participation level. Cordelia's nephew's doing fake security, now facing federal conspiracy charges for the entire $127 million scheme. We prepared for public confrontation like military strategists, professional videographer hired for all meetings, security increased to prevent evidence tampering, emergency city council session requested by Representative Rodriguez, national media alerted for major corruption announcement, investigation revealed corruption depth, 6 city officials received Blackstone payments, 3 county employees expedited fraudulent documents, 2 judges issued questionable orders, over 20 conspirators across multiple agencies. But the most satisfying preparation was contacting every homeowner individually, offering legal protection regardless of previous stance, building community support while separating innocent families from the corrupt system, victimizing everyone. The taste of approaching justice was sharp and metallic, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Harrison reviewed our evidence compilation with the satisfaction of a master craftsman admiring his finest work. "Rex," he said, chuckling like a man half his age, "I've practiced law since before your grandfather bought that land. This is the most airtight corruption case I've ever seen." Cordelia is going to need a miracle lawyer, and even then she's looking at federal prison until she qualifies for Medicare. If Grandpa could see this legal army assembled in his honor, he'd probably say, "Boy, I always knew that woman was trouble, but I never figured she'd be dumb enough to steal from a surveyor." The old man always appreciated good strategy, even from beyond the grave. The trap was set, evidence overwhelming, allies positioned. All that remained was springing it at exactly the right moment for maximum devastating impact. Cordelia's desperation became palpable the moment she realized the FBI was closing in. The sabotage campaign began on a Monday night when my security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned during what the Weather Service called a localized electrical storm, despite clear skies and no other power outages in the area. Tuesday morning, I discovered someone had poured concrete mix down my RV's waste tank. The acrid smell of wet cement and the metallic taste of rage filled my mouth as I realized this wasn't just harassment anymore. This was attempted destruction of my home. Wednesday brought anonymous death threats tucked under my windshield wipers. "Leave now, or accidents happen to stubborn people." The paper felt cheap and threatening between my fingers, but what really caught my attention was the faint watermark, the same expensive stationery Cordelia used for official HOA correspondence. Thursday's escalation was the most brazen yet. The city suddenly scheduled emergency road maintenance that required closing the only access road to my property. The construction crew, looking embarrassed and avoiding eye contact, erected barriers that would trap me on my own land for an estimated 2 weeks. The foreman, a weathered man named Miguel, quietly approached me while his crew pretended to be busy. "Mr. Thornfield, I've been doing city work for 15 years. This isn't emergency maintenance. Someone paid overtime rates to have us block your road. Friday brought the bribery attempt that changed everything." Cordelia arrived at sunset in her white Mercedes, stepping out with a black leather briefcase that looked expensive enough to fund a small campaign. The click of her heels on gravel sounded different this time, nervous, urgent, desperate. "Rex," she said, her voice lacking its usual condescending sweetness, "I think we've both let this situation get out of hand." She opened the briefcase to reveal neat stacks of $100 bills. The smell of new money mixed with her perfume created an oddly intoxicating combination. $250,000 cash, no taxes, no paperwork, no questions asked. All you have to do is sign a simple relocation agreement and find somewhere else to enjoy your retirement. The mini twist that made this conversation pure gold. I was wearing an FBI wire and every word was being recorded in crystal clear digital audio for federal prosecutors. "That's generous, Cordelia, but I'm pretty attached to my grandfather's land." "Rex," her voice dropped to something approaching a whisper, "you don't understand how deep this goes. I have friends in high places who can make problems disappear permanently." She was actually threatening murder on a federal recording device. "Accidents happen to people who don't know when to quit. House fires, car crashes, heart attacks, terrible things, but so difficult to prove weren't natural causes." Then came the revelation that made my blood turn to ice. "I know where your daughter works in Colorado. Sarah's such a pretty girl. Be a shame if something happened to her because her father was too stubborn to accept a reasonable settlement." Cordelia had just threatened my family on a federal wire recording. The woman was handing federal prosecutors enough evidence to charge her with everything short of treason. My counterpunch was simple: appear to consider her offer while the FBI documented every additional crime she committed. Agent Santos had coached me on this scenario. Let her keep talking. Let her keep incriminating herself. Let her believe she was winning while she dug her own grave deeper. "I need time to think about this, Cordelia. It's a lot of money." "Of course. But don't take too long. My friends get impatient, and impatient people make poor decisions." After she left, I sat in my RV listening to the recording playback with Agent Santos. The quality was so clear you could hear Cordelia's breathing between threats. "Rex," Santos said, her voice filled with prosecutorial satisfaction, "she just confessed to bribery, witness intimidation, conspiracy, and making terroristic threats across state lines. We've got enough felonies on tape to keep her busy until your granddaughter graduates college." But Cordelia's desperation led to an even more spectacular miscalculation: the attempted frame-up. Sunday night, someone planted drug paraphernalia near my RV, methamphetamine pipes, synthetic marijuana, and what looked like cocaine residue in small baggies. Monday morning brought an anonymous tip to Cedar Park police about suspicious drug activities at my location. The mini twist that destroyed this scheme. My security cameras had been upgraded after the sabotage incident, and the new system had night vision capabilities that captured everything. The footage clearly showed Billy Blackstone, Cordelia's nephew, planting evidence at 2:47 a.m. When Police Sergeant Dave Martinez arrived to investigate the anonymous tip, he found the planted evidence, but he also found my security footage showing exactly how it got there. "Mr. Thornfield," Sergeant Martinez said, his voice heavy with disgust, "in 20 years of police work, I've never seen a frame-up this sloppy. Whoever's doing this to you just committed about 6 felonies on high-definition video." Turns out Sergeant Martinez had been investigating Blackstone Realty for previous fraud complaints and recognized the family pattern of escalating harassment when legal pressure mounted. The FBI analysis of all sabotage evidence yielded fingerprints, DNA, and electronic traces leading directly back to Cordelia's operation. Every criminal act was documented, recorded, and traced to specific conspirators. Agent Santos paid me another visit, this time with a smile that could have powered the entire Texas power grid. "Rex, they're not just criminals anymore. They're federal defendants. Every threat, every act of sabotage, every bribe attempt is going to be exhibit evidence in a federal courtroom." The sound of justice approaching was like distant thunder. You couldn't see it yet, but you could feel the electricity building in the air. 3 days later, Cordelia made her final, desperate mistake. She tried to flee to Mexico with $2.3 million in cash withdrawn from various shell company accounts. Border Patrol arrested her at Laredo, and the money became evidence of flight risk and consciousness of guilt. The woman who'd thought she could steal 40 acres and intimidate a grieving grandson was now facing federal charges that could put her in prison for the rest of her natural life. Sometimes the best revenge is just giving your enemies enough rope to hang themselves. Cordelia's arrest at the Mexican border should have ended this nightmare, But her allies back in Cedar Park weren't ready to surrender. With their ringleader in federal custody, the remaining conspirators launched a final, desperate smear campaign that was equal parts vicious and stupid. The coordinated attack began Tuesday morning when KXAN News ran a hit piece titled "Land Dispute Reveals Troubled Past." The story, clearly fed by Cordelia's remaining allies, claimed I had questionable business practices during my surveying career and suggested I was using legal technicalities to avoid legitimate debts. Not a single fact in the story was true, but the damage was immediate. The taste of injustice was bitter as I watched my reputation being assassinated on live television by people who knew better. Within hours, anonymous robocalls started hitting every phone number in Cedar Park. The recorded message, spoken by a voice actor trying to sound authoritative, warned residents about a dangerous criminal living illegally in their community and urged them to contact City Council immediately. The robocall company, when pressed by our attorneys, revealed they'd been hired by a shell company called Community Safety Solutions, which traced back to an IP address registered to Blackstone Realty's office building. But the digital smear campaign was where Cordelia's allies really showed their desperation. Overnight, fake online reviews appeared for my old surveying business. Rex Thornfield is a fraud, couldn't trust him with a property line, investigated by state authorities multiple times. The smell of desperation was overwhelming as Harrison Steele's digital forensics expert traced the fake reviews to a bot farm operated from 3 computers in Blackstone Realty's office. These people were so panicked they were committing multiple felonies using their own business internet connection. The political pressure campaign was equally ham-fisted. 3 city council members who were still in Cordelia's pocket organized a protest outside City Hall, demanding my immediate arrest. The dozen protesters holding "Justice for Meadowbrook" signs looked like a community theater production of an angry mob. Mayor Patricia Hendricks, one of the few officials not connected to Cordelia's network, watched the pathetic demonstration with visible disgust. "I've seen more convincing protests at middle school student council elections," she told Maxine Rodriguez. The mini-twist that turned this final gambit into a complete disaster. Every attack was being monitored by federal agents as evidence of continuing criminal conspiracy. Agent Santos had warned Cordelia's remaining allies that any attempts to intimidate witnesses or obstruct the federal investigation would result in additional charges. They ignored the warning and kept digging their graves deeper. When TV station KXAN retracted their story after our attorneys threatened a defamation lawsuit, the correction revealed that the sources had provided fabricated documents and false information. The station's investigative team, embarrassed by being used as pawns, started their own investigation into who had fed them lies. The robocall operation backfired spectacularly when residents realized they were being manipulated. Janet Morrison, who'd become an unlikely ally after learning the truth, organized a counter-campaign encouraging neighbors to report the harassing calls to authorities. "We thought Rex was the problem," Janet told Channel 8 News. "Turns out he was the only one telling us the truth." The social media bot investigation became a teaching moment for federal prosecutors. Carmen Valdez, my private investigator, worked with FBI cybercrime specialists to trace every fake account, every purchased review, every coordinated attack back to its source. "Rex," Carmen explained, "they've created a digital paper trail that's even more damning than their financial crimes. Every fake review includes metadata showing when it was created, from which computer, and using which credit card for payment. The knowledge nugget that sealed their fate, under federal law, using computers to commit fraud across state lines triggers wire fraud charges, and organized fake review campaigns constitute consumer fraud conspiracy. Each fake review carried potential sentences of up to 5 years federal prison. My final counterattack was simply letting them continue their crime spree while federal agents documented everything. Every fake review was screenshot and archived. Every robocall was recorded and traced. Every protest sign was photographed and analyzed for fingerprints. Harrison Steele watched this digital evidence accumulate with the satisfaction of a master chess player watching his opponent's inevitable checkmate approach. "Rex, these people are committing federal crimes in real time while under active FBI investigation. It's like watching someone rob a bank during a police convention." The community response to the smear campaign proved that truth eventually wins. Property owners who'd initially supported Cordelia began asking uncomfortable questions. 3 more families approached me privately to apologize and offer support. The tipping point came when Dr. Patricia Indigo's forensic analysis proved the fake reviews contained identical grammatical errors and writing patterns. clearly showing they were written by the same person, someone who'd also written several of Cordelia's official HOA communications. Same writing style, same vocabulary patterns, same punctuation errors, Dr. Indigo explained. It's like they left a literary fingerprint on every crime. The final phase of their desperation was almost sad to watch. City Councilman David Morse, realizing his connection to Cordelia was about to be exposed, held a press conference announcing he was reconsidering his position on the property dispute. Too late. Federal prosecutors already had recorded phone calls between Morse and Cordelia discussing how to neutralize the Thornfield problem through official channels. Agent Santos's final visit before the public confrontation carried news that made my grandfather's spirit smile. "Rex, we've identified 23 federal crimes committed by 12 different people in just the past 6 weeks. Every attempt to intimidate you has strengthened our case." The sound of federal indictments being prepared echoed through the courthouse as grand jury testimony concluded. Cordelia's allies had turned a property fraud case into a master class in how to commit every possible federal crime while under active investigation. If you're going to be criminals, at least be competent criminals. These people couldn't organize a conspiracy without leaving digital evidence, DNA samples, and recorded confessions. The Cedar Park City Council chamber had never seen anything like it. Standing room only, with overflow crowds watching on monitors in the lobby. Local TV crews from Austin, San Antonio, and Houston set up equipment along the walls. National news outlets had sent stringers after Maxine Rodriguez's investigation went viral. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with camera equipment and the electricity of impending justice. I walked in quietly with Harrison Steele and federal attorney Amanda Indigo, taking seats in the front row. Behind us sat Janet Morrison and 12 other Meadowbrook families who'd learned the truth about their situation. The sound of whispered conversations filled the air like static before a storm. Cordelia's remaining allies had arrived in force, clearly expecting some kind of victory celebration. Acting HOA President Robert Williams strutted to the podium with a thick folder of documents, his confidence radiating through the packed chamber. Mayor Patricia Hendricks called the meeting to order, her voice tight with barely controlled tension. "We're here tonight to address the ongoing property dispute between the Meadowbrook Estates HOA and Rex Thornfield." Williams launched into what sounded like a prepared victory speech. "Tonight, we're pleased to announce that Mr. Thornfield has finally agreed to pay his fair share of community expenses and resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding." He held up a fake settlement agreement that I'd supposedly signed, his voice carrying across the chamber like a conquering general addressing defeated enemies. "This proves that when good people stand together, the system works. Mr. Thornfield will pay his $53,000 in delinquent fees and relocate his recreational vehicle to an appropriate facility." The taste of irony was metallic and sharp as I listened to this man announce my surrender while federal agents positioned themselves around the room. When Mayor Hendricks called for my response, I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 8 months of harassment, theft, and threats settling on my shoulders. "Mr. Williams, you're absolutely right about one thing. This ends tonight." I walked to the podium, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet chamber. Harrison Steele handed me a thick folder that landed on the podium with a satisfying thud. "Ladies and gentlemen, for 8 months I've been working as a federal informant in the largest property fraud investigation in Texas history." The room erupted. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Williams's face went white as fresh paint. "Every threat, every bribe, every forged document, we have it all. The federal grand jury issued arrest warrants this afternoon for conspiracy, racketeering, bank fraud, and civil rights violations." That's when FBI agent Santos stood up in the back of the room, her badge catching the overhead lights. "Federal agents, please remain seated." The mic drop moment had arrived. Cordelia Blackstone built 145 homes on land she stole from 11 different families. She defrauded banks out of $127 million, corrupted city officials, and threatened innocent people. But here's what she didn't know. I paused, letting the silence build like pressure in a steam engine. You don't steal land from someone who spent 30 years helping federal prosecutors convict people exactly like her. Williams tried to bolt for the exit, but found his path blocked by federal agents. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the chamber as Agent Santos read him his rights. "Robert Williams, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, mail fraud, and civil rights violations under federal law." The arrests continued like dominoes falling. City Councilman David Morse led away in handcuffs. Building Inspector Frank Kellerman escorted out by federal marshals. Health Department Supervisor Patricia Williams crying as they read her Miranda rights. But the moment that made this all worthwhile came when I addressed the innocent families directly. To everyone living in Meadowbrook Estates, you are victims, not villains. You bought homes in good faith from criminals who never owned the land they sold you. Janet Morrison was crying, but they were tears of relief, not fear. I will sell your individual lots to you at the original purchase price, not current market value. No family will lose their home because of these criminals' actions. The standing ovation was deafening. Camera crews captured families hugging, children cheering, and the sound of justice finally being served. Mayor Hendricks, visibly shaken but relieved, announced the city would cooperate fully with federal investigators and implement new oversight procedures to prevent future corruption. The knowledge nugget that drove this entire operation home: federal cooperation agreements protect citizens who assist investigations from prosecution for related minor violations, and can even result in financial rewards when the government recovers substantial funds. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Property fraud trending nationally within hours. Rex becoming an unlikely symbol of fighting back against corruption. The story picked up by CNN, Fox News, and major networks coast to coast. As federal agents led the last conspirator from the chamber, Cordelia's nephew, Billy Blackstone, shouted over his shoulder, "You have no idea how deep this goes." I caught his eye and smiled. "Actually, Billy, we know exactly how deep it goes. The FBI has been recording all of you for 6 months." The taste of victory was sweet, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that Margaret Indigo and the other victims would finally get justice, even if they weren't alive to see their tormentors led away in handcuffs. The sound of cameras clicking and federal agents closing evidence boxes filled the chamber as 8 months of harassment, threats, and corruption finally ended with the click of handcuffs and the reading of constitutional rights. Justice, it turns out, sounds exactly like what it is: the law working the way it's supposed to. The gavel came down on Cordelia Blackstone's sentencing hearing 18 months later with the finality of thunder: 12 years federal prison, $8.7 million in restitution, and a lifetime ban from any real estate activities. The sound echoed through the Austin federal courthouse like the closing of a book on the most audacious property fraud scheme in Texas history. Her husband James received 6 years for conspiracy and lost his city planning position. 3 city officials got sentences ranging from 2 to 4 years, plus lifetime bans from public service. The HOA attorney was disbarred and faced separate criminal charges. Even Billy and Jake Blackstone, the fake security guards, received 18 months each for their roles in the conspiracy. The financial resolution came through federal asset forfeiture that recovered $12.3 million from Cordelia's hidden accounts across 3 states. Insurance companies settled fraud claims for an additional $8.9 million. Combined with real estate sales, we had enough money to make every victim whole and then some. The process of selling individual lots to homeowners at 2019 prices, 60% below current market value, took 6 months and felt like the world's most satisfying real estate closing marathon. The smell of fresh ink on legitimate deeds mixed with tears of relief as families finally gained clear title to their homes. I kept 15 acres around my grandfather's original home site and established the Ezra Thornfield Memorial Conservation Trust with the remaining land. The area where Thunder the Bull used to graze became a wildlife preserve, while the old vegetable garden site was transformed into a community garden where neighbors grow tomatoes and peppers together. The personal healing came slowly, like sunrise after a long night. Building my modest cabin on the exact spot where Ezra's farmhouse had stood felt like completing a circle. The sound of hammers and saws replaced the clicking of handcuffs and shuffling of legal papers. My friendship with many former adversaries developed naturally. Janet Morrison and I laugh now about our first confrontation, and her kids fish in the same creek where I caught my first bass 60 years ago. The taste of her homemade apple pie rivals anything my grandmother ever made. The consulting business started accidentally when 3 families from San Antonio contacted me about their own HOA nightmare. Boundary Line Investigations now helps victims of property fraud across the Southwest, and we've prevented an estimated $43 million in additional thefts. Maxine Rodriguez's investigative series, Stolen Ground, The Meadowbrook Estates Fraud, won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service Journalism. Her book deal and documentary rights are funding a scholarship program for aspiring investigative reporters. The ripple effects spread far beyond Cedar Park. The Texas legislature passed Ezra's Law, requiring independent verification of all subdivision documents by licensed surveyors before city approval. The FBI established HOA fraud task forces in 12 major cities. Real estate professionals nationwide now attend training seminars about fraud detection. From all my years in surveying, I'd learned that land fraud is one of America's oldest crimes, but modern technology makes it easier to catch and prosecute. Digital records, forensic accounting, and federal coordination turned what used to be local corruption into federal cases with serious prison time. The National Property Rights Association named me Citizen Advocate of the Year, though the real heroes were the FBI agents, prosecutors, and honest city employees who chose justice over convenience. The award sits on my mantle next to a photo of Grandpa and Thunder the Bull. The Ezra Thornfield Surveying Scholarship awards $50,000 annually to first-generation college students pursuing careers in land surveying or property law. Recipients spend one summer doing pro bono property verification work, and the program has already prevented 6 attempted fraud schemes. The annual Property Rights Day Festival brings the community together each October with barbecue, live music, and educational booths about property fraud prevention. The sound of children playing on legitimate playground equipment while their parents enjoy food trucks parked on land they actually own feels like victory every single time. 2 years after the sentencing, I received a letter from Cordelia in federal prison. "You won this round, but there are others like me out there." My reply was simple: "I'm counting on it. I've got nothing but time and a very good legal team." The bigger picture impact exceeded our wildest expectations. Congressional hearings on HOA abuse led to federal oversight legislation. International attention sparked similar investigations in Canada and Australia. Law schools now use our case as required study in property fraud prosecution. But the moment that made everything worthwhile came last spring when Margaret Indigo's granddaughter visited the Conservation Trust. She planted a memorial tree where Margaret's stolen property had been, and the sound of dirt falling on roots felt like closure for all the victims who hadn't lived to see justice. Sitting on my front porch each morning, watching sunrise over land that belongs to the right people, I understand what Grandpa meant about preserving principles. In America, you can't just take what isn't yours, no matter how powerful you think you are. The taste of morning coffee on legitimately owned property is sweeter than any victory I could have imagined. This story's over, but unfortunately, there are dozens more just like it happening right now. Next week, I'll tell you about the HOA that charged residents $500 for each blade of grass that grew too tall, and how one retired teacher used their own bylaws to shut them down permanently. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, share your story in the comments. I read every single one, and the best ones might become future episodes. And hit that subscribe button, because as long as there are corrupt HOAs out there, we'll be here to expose them.